So, we've got a great night for you tonight, I think. This is our first lecture of the season, so welcome to it. And it's funny because my hearing aid is telling me it's running out of juice, so if I start singing to this little song, you'll know why. First, a little bit of housekeeping. I want to first say that we have one of our board members back from some surgery, and she's doing great. So, Gail Todd, we want to say thank you for being here, and we love seeing you tonight. You'll notice some of the other board members of the Science Club wandering around. They're all wearing something like this. So that's how you'll know them. Say hi and thank you. We do put some work into these, and we're really proud of them, and we're really thrilled that you're all here. I also want to thank Dana Greenblatt, who is sort of our administrative genius for putting together all the logistics for these events for the Frontiers in Science, and Peyton Meyer, who is our AV assistant and genius. And I want to give a quick thank you to an anonymous donor who, because of them, we have a much brighter projector today. If you're not on our email list, and I think probably all of you are, but if you're not, you can sign up and put your email on a sheet of paper by the front door, or you can go to scienceandsisters@gmail.com and send us your contact info, and we'll add you to the list. So you'll hear about these events throughout the year. So tonight we have sharks, and Dr. Chapple received his BA from Boston University in biology with a concentration in marine science in 2001 and his PhD in 2009 from UC Davis. After college, Taylor worked designing experimental fishing nets to avoid bycatch off of New England and taught marine science aboard a sailboat in the Puget Sound. Sounds pretty good. He first started working with sharks in 2002, and in 2010 began an appointment with the Max Planck Institute in Germany, studying the energetics and behavior of highly nomadic species, and he also studied how sharks navigate by developing a magnetic tag, and I think we might hear something about that tonight. In 2012, Taylor began a second postdoctoral appointment with the Hopkins Marine Station of Stanford University, and at Stanford, he worked on a continuing assessment of white sharks as well as their behavior and movements. Taylor began his work at OSU in 2019, and he is the founder and brainchild behind the Big Fish Lab. When you hear Big Fish Lab, you may have heard that name before. If you were here last winter, Taylor's wife, Jamie Cornelius, was here talking about bird resilience. And she runs the Little Fish Lab, the Little Bird Lab at OSU. Little Bird Lab, Big Fish Lab. And we're hoping to get Jamie back sometime this year or next. We're working on it. If you were here, you'll remember there was a fascinating presentation, and she finished it up with 3 original songs. I'm not sure if we're going to hear any music tonight. There's a possibility. There are 2 young Chappelles. Is that their last name? I didn't even get that. But I want to say welcome to Huck and Cash, who you'll see running around. Anyway, they're here with Taylor, and we're so happy they're here with him. I think that's just about it. So without any further delay, I want to welcome Taylor to the stage, and I'm really looking forward to this lecture. Thanks.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. I will couple of things is that we actually go by the corn apples. We put Cornelius and Chapple together. So, as you know from our bar tab, it's on the corn apples if anyone wants to. Yeah, and you'll see two blonde-headed kids running around. They may come up to ask me for passwords for something at some point. So they've been to enough of these talks that they're massively bored by sharks and birds. I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about some of the work that we've been doing at the Big Fish Lab and some of the work I've been doing sort of around the world for the past about 20 years. And so I titled this Shark Infested Waters and why that's a good thing, because one of the big tenets of what we do in my lab is to try to share with people about what makes sharks unique, what makes them important for the systems we have around us. So not these sort of fear-mongering media sharks that when you go to Shark Week that you see, or you go to the news and you see. But the sharks that are actually critically important for the habitats that we all love and appreciate in the ocean, and for the economies and the communities that are dependent on those. So I will note that all of the artwork that you'll see throughout this is done by one of my undergraduate students, Natalie Donato. She's an incredible artist. I'll showcase some other stuff that she did, but I just want to recognize her. And you're going to see this sort of picture a number of times throughout, and I'll talk about why we shared this photo so much in a few minutes. So I'm not alone at the Big Fish Lab. I have quite a huge group of folks. Obviously a very sort of diverse group of folks that help me lead this lab. And I want to point out the sort of three heads. And so I did find the lab, the lab was founded in 2019, but since then it's grown to add two other PIs in the project, and one is Dr. James Ilikowski, who's on the left there, and James is a reproductive physiologist. And so this is a picture of James working with, I think that's a bull shark, down in the Bahamas, and so he's interested in the reproductive cycle, when and where animals reproduce. And so right there he has a underwater ultrasound that he's actually determining whether that animal is pregnant as it's swimming by him. And so if you look at this picture here, you can see here's the eyeball, that's the mouth, and that is the head of a shark in the belly of that animal. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we do with these animals. So it's really, really cool stuff that James does, looking at the reproductive biology of these animals. Alexandra McInturf is a research associate in the lab, and she is an animal behaviorist. And so she's looking at not only what are animals doing, but why are they doing it. And this is what one of these events we call a Taurus event, and this is basking sharks. So these are the second biggest shark in the ocean. They get to about 30, 35 feet long. So you imagine that is a whole pile of them, an actual shark tornado going down in the water column. And so Alex is looking at things like this. Why do these animals do these behaviors? And what can we learn from that? And then the work that I generally do, or mostly do, is I'm a movement ecologist. And so I look at where animals go and why they're making those decisions. And so you'll see there's a track on the bottom there in the blue, and then next to that is an animal that has a series of tags in it. And then at the top there you see that's a white shark, some of the work that I've been doing for almost 20 years now in California. You can tell that was right in the middle of the pandemic. I have a mask on even though I was by myself on a boat. And that shark's name was Rona. We named her Rona after Corona because she was a massive, massive animal that we're lucky to have had a CNN film crew with us on that day. So the work that we do, as I said before, is kind of all around the globe. And so these are just a couple of sort of bullets of places that we do work. And whether it's basking sharks, which you see in the top left there, these big, massive filter-feeding animals, like a whale, that live off our coast here, as well as off of Ireland is where we do that work. A lot of different species in the Pacific, the Indian Oceans, the Atlantic Ocean. So we are based in Oregon. We are the only shark research lab in the Pacific Northwest. And so we're the only ones really doing the work here, and one of the main ones along the whole West Coast. But we do have a sort of a global footprint about the work that we do. And it's really important that we do this work, in my mind, because there's so much misinformation out there, right? So the idea is when you heard shark, you probably didn't think about reproductive biology. You probably didn't think about animal behavior. You thought about something jumping in water and eating you, right? Because that is what is propagated, right? Because we know that fear sells. We know that too well, I think, right now, is that fear really does sell. And so, popular media has really taken this on. And I will say that Jamie and I were in grad school together, and we took it upon ourselves to try to watch every bad shark movie that was out there. It is impossible. You can't do it. I actually haven't even seen this one. This one was new, and I put it up there because I thought this is a great one. But there's so many different ways to scare you. But the thing is that this isn't the truth about sharks. And I know we can sort of laugh about it, but this is what's in sort of the public psyche. And so when we think about, hey, we actually need to conserve these sharks, we need to protect these sharks, we need to think about their habitats and their role in ecosystems, people sort of go back to this idea of Jaws, and they go back to the fear, and instead of the appreciation for the role that they play. And so that's a lot of what we try to do in the lab. And just to sort of put it all in perspective, I love random statistics, so you might see these throughout. So on a given year, 150 people killed by falling coconuts, 29 people are killed by taking selfies. I always say that I think we could do without those 29 people. And 24 people are killed by flying corks. Right? So we don't necessarily equate an entire week-long discovery shows about corks, right? It doesn't have that same sort of thing, but in reality, only about 10 people globally are killed by sharks, and actually in the last few years, it's been down to less than 5. So it really is this fear that's irrational. It's much more dangerous for us to drive to the beach, to park at the beach, to eat whatever sugary, crappy drinks and eat potato chips that we do on the beach than it is to actually swim in shark-infested waters. And in fact, we need to rethink about it. Because on average, in a given year, we kill between 100 and 150 million sharks a year globally. These are just a few pictures. These are markets in Hong Kong just for that fin trade. And so I like to think about it is we don't have a shark problem. Sharks have a people problem. So I think we need to think about it differently. And part of that is getting us to really think about these animals and sort of relate to them in a different way than that mindless killing beast. Because we've seen these massive declines, and this is just a figure that shows the decline of what we call pelagic species, so these offshore species, over the past 50 years, and they've declined by 70% in the last 50 years. And right, so the 1970s, that's when Jaws came out. Jaws came out in 1975. Right, and so we already saw this, we're seeing this massive decline just in that 50 years. And there's a really cool paper that sort of looks back in time, and this is already like almost single-digit percentages in 1970 of what the natural population should have been at, or were at. So we really have done these massive degradations of the populations of sharks that are out there. And I think part of it is because we don't appreciate the role that they play. So we look at the Serengeti, right? We look at these mass migrations of animals, and we can relate to that because we can watch it, we can see it. David Attenborough can tell us about it, and man, it's the coolest thing ever. Similar to birds, and I'm not going to throw Jamie under the bus because birds are cool too. But we really can appreciate what birds do because they travel in the system that we're used to, right? You've probably seen something like this, and this is so cool, right? Because we can track these birds and we can see it. But I think what we haven't necessarily appreciated in the past is that sharks and fish in the ocean are making the same movements. And so these are tracks from sharks and a couple other species. There's some whales in here and some turtles and things. But they're also making these massive migrations, these massive predictable migrations. So they're traveling thousands of miles, tens of thousands of miles at times, and coming back to the same places, and for some part of their life history, right? To reproduce, or to eat, or to some other part that's important to their life. And so in our lab, this is what we try to do, is try to share that. And we do that sometimes through dissections, where we share those publicly. These are kid groups we do. And then we do a lot of big events. And so on the bottom there is a big, large dissection that we did on OSU campus. I'll talk a little bit more about those, where we showcase a little bit more about what's unique and cool about sharks. And so that's what I'm going to get into today. I do want to preface this by saying that sharks are also still predators. They have been around for 400 million years in a similar form. So they're really good at what they do. So these photos are all photos of sharks doing what they do. So there's a shark that's coming up on a decoy that we put out to try to get it to come to our boat. This is an animal that was coming up towards some bait that we had, and then on the bottom there is a shark just after a seal kill. So these are their real behaviors. And so we have to remember that they are predators. So the idea that folks go out and suggest that sharks are not predators and that we can cuddle them or you can grab onto their fins or that you should swim with them at any time you can, no. The same way that you would not say, hey, there is a grizzly bear in this car. I'm going to get in there and take a selfie with it, right? You wouldn't do that. It just sounds like a ridiculous idea. But there are folks that are sort of promoting that. So I do want to sort of, the end of my sort of soapbox talk is that we can appreciate that sharks play these incredible roles, but they are also incredible predators, and they do have a role that is not for us to take photos of and us to make stupid decisions, because the things that are going to be blamed in those situations are not the influencers that make horrible decisions, it's going to be the sharks. Okay, everybody good with my soapbox? Did I get that? Okay, let's move on to the cool stuff. Alright, so when I first started here, people said, oh wow, Oregon, okay cool, are there any sharks in Oregon? Said, well, it turns out that actually there are sharks in Oregon. Does anybody know how many species of sharks there are in waters off of Oregon? Ballpark. It's okay to be wrong. My kids are not here. They would totally cheat right now. Anyway, ballpark. 18. 18, getting closer. 25. A little lower. 15. There were 15 about a month ago. We just found a few records recently of a new species. So currently, we have 16 species of sharks in Oregon. The new shark is called a prickly shark. It's super cool. It's a weird deep water shark that we've caught a few, or folks have caught a few off of Oregon, so we've added it to the species list. So there are 16 different species of sharks in Oregon. And historically, we think about sort of Pacific Northwest marine ecosystems as being sort of based on salmon, right? We have this sort of salmon-centric world. And if we think about it, you have salmon, then you have your killer whales, or your other marine mammals, or birds that are eating the salmon. That sort of makes your system up. But this is a really simplified system. And so when I came in, the question was like, what else plays a role in this ecosystem, right? So if we want to have healthy economies, we want to have healthy fisheries, we want to be able to eat seafood, then it means we need to have a healthy structure in our oceans. And so maybe it's more complex than just marine mammals eating salmon. So the question is, what role do sharks play in these ecosystems? And it turns out that they're incredibly interwoven into what's happening out there. So this just gives kind of a sense of who's eating who and how it's all relating. So orcas are eating white sharks are eating seals. This is Sevengill, which we'll talk about. It's eating seals, but it's also prey to other things. So there's these really dynamic interactions that were happening, or that are happening, that we hadn't been really appreciating in the way that we were managing our ecosystems, or even understanding our ecosystems. So that's where that's the world that I stepped into. There had been 0 scientific publications that had come out of waters in Oregon, and there had been 2 that had come out of coastal California, coastal Washington. So just give you a sense that the work that I've been doing down in California on white sharks for the past 20 years, we have about 50 or 60 publications just on that species there. So it gives you a sense of how disparate the work that's happened between the Pacific Northwest and other regions. But it's also, part of that is because it is really, really hard. So how do we study things that we can't go with, right? So we saw those wildebeest on the Serengeti, and we can watch them, right? We can put a radio tag on them and let them go, or we can sit there with binoculars and understand what they're doing. But sharks, you can't do that with, right? They're cryptic, they're underwater, they don't have to come to the surface to breathe, even like a marine mammal. So how do we actually study these animals? So I'll go through a little bit of the technology so that y'all can understand a little bit of the background of the research that I talk about. So one thing about the ocean is that once you go below the surface of the water, you can't transmit a GPS signal. So you can't just put a little Garmin on the shark and let it go. Jamie's bird's way easier. She'll never tell you that, but they are way easier. Because you could put a GPS locator on them. We can't do that with sharks. So as soon as they go underwater, that signal goes away. So we have a couple different ways that we sort of try to beat those laws of physics. So this is a suite of the different types of tags that we use, and I'll go through a few of them. The first one is what we call an acoustic tag. And so if y'all have ever watched A Hunt for Red October, I'm definitely dating myself. If you've watched Hunt for Red October, any of the movies where there's a submarine, you know, they do the little ping sound. That's because they can't do right underwater. It's the acoustic signature that they send out to listen for other submarines. And so we use that same sort of technology, an acoustic pinging tag underwater to tell us when a shark is around. So on the right there you have these two tags that we would either implant inside an animal or on the back of an animal. And they will release a unique sort of ping signature. And then you have a receiver, which you see on the bottom, that we set to specific places in the ocean to listen for that. And that receiver can only that tag can only transmit for about maybe a kilometer or something like that. And so it's sort of like if I was walking around town and just started yelling, "Taylor, Taylor," anybody that was close enough to me would hear that. But if you were 5 blocks away, you wouldn't be able to hear it. So you'd be able to get the real close information if I was nearby you. But if I'm not nearby you, it doesn't provide any information. And how this works is the tag will go on the back of the animal. So this one, we're actually darting into the back as it swims by. It goes into the musculature there, and then it'll stay on top of that animal for the next 4 to 5 years and send that acoustic ping out to us anytime it comes around. We can, let's see, the next one. And so how that works, you can see on the chain here, there's an animation of a receiver, and when the shark comes by, if I can get it to go, the shark comes by, it sends that acoustic signal out, records that information, and then we can have that go up to the surface of the buoy and then transmit to us that the shark was around. So again, this works really well when we have these close proximity animals. Another type that we have is what we call a camera tag or a biologger. This is sort of like a Fitbit. So you all know you walk around with your Fitbit, it counts your steps. Sharks, fish do the same thing, except theirs are tail beats. So this one works a little bit different, where it has a camera on it and it's recording those movements of the animal throughout its day. And so this specific version will clamp on to the dorsal fin of a shark as it swims by and travel with it. So this is the type of thing we can look at energetics, we can look at behavior. So this is some work I originally started in 2013 with white sharks to look at how much energy it was taking them on each of these predation attempts when they were jumping out of the water. This gives just a little sense of what that looks like. So this is some work I was doing in South Africa. I have the tag there in the red, and a colleague bringing the shark up to the boat. You see as it comes by, clamps on, and then bobs your uncle. So that shark will swim around for the next 4 or 5 days with that tag on it, recording what it sees. And what's unique about this is, again, remember, we can't sit there and watch the animal, but the tag can do it. And so it was really unique and insightful for us. So you can see the shark swimming in the bottom. You see a seal drop down there on the right. There's some more in the front of it. And so the seals would actually blow bubbles in the shark's face as it swam by. And it turns out that we always thought that kelp forests were aversive to sharks. Sharks would not go into kelp forests. We thought that was sort of a safe haven. But it turns out that they actually hunt specifically in kelp forests. And so instead of doing the big breach thing, which we see on Discovery Channel all the time, they actually will corral the seals into these kelp patties, and when the seals aren't paying attention, then they'll go to strike. So it's a completely different behavior that we had never known because we hadn't taken the time to be underwater with them while they're doing their day-to-day, right? We're looking at these moments when they came to the surface, but not the rest of the time. And this technology is pretty cool because it also teaches us about how different species interact. And so this is a project I did in 2015. And this is an elephant seal, giant slug. And so this elephant seal, we were trying to look at the predator-prey interaction between seals and white sharks, but this elephant seal didn't find a white shark, it found a harbor seal. So this harbor seal and the elephant seal sort of checking each other out. And if any of you have ever had a puppy, this is like exactly what a puppy looks like. You know, the puppy pose and freak out. Right? So it's like these cool interactions that we see that animals have together that we don't necessarily appreciate because the way that we're interacting with them normally is at the surface. So we have this very biased view. So these camera tags, these like Fitbits, give us some insights into what they're doing on a much finer scale and how they're interacting with one another. So both of those tags are really, really fine scale information. But if we want to know where these animals are going in a broader scale, remember I talked they travel tens of thousands of miles, we need something different. And this is where we have these what we call satellite tags. And satellite tags are a little bit different because instead of transmitting anything, they actually archive the information on the tag while it's on the animal. And then at some pre-programmed time, it'll pop off and then transmits its archived information to a satellite. And then we can get that and figure out where the animal's been. And so it doesn't use GPS, it actually uses what we call geolocation. So it uses sort of like the way that old-time mariners would use the stars in sunrise and sunset to navigate by. We do some fancy algorithms and estimate some positions from those tags. So they have error, maybe a couple 100-kilometer error in them when you try to estimate a position. But when you're talking about here to the grocery store, maybe that's not good enough accuracy. But if you're talking about here to Japan, that's plenty good accuracy. So they're all a little bit different. And this is sort of what it looks like. We would put it on the same way that we did with the acoustic tag with a sort of dart into the shark's back. And then the shark will swim around with that tag for maybe up to a year or two, and then it pops off and transmits its information up to a satellite. And so this is an example of one that we put on in California. It popped off in Hawaii, and someone was forced to go to Hawaii for a few days to find them. The great thing was that sometimes it takes forever to find them because they're about the size of this microphone. And we scheduled 4 days to go find it. We found it the first evening. So then it was like 3 days of surf adventure. So it was great. It's the perks, right? And then the last one tag that I'll talk about is what we call a birth tag. So this is that cool one. When I talked about James Silikowski and his work with reproductive physiology, this is a tag that he developed over the last few years. And this is super cool because it helps us really understand these important life cycles in sharks. And so sharks have internal fertilization. So the female will, so not like a tuna or something that will send its eggs out into the water, and then the males will send sperm out in the mix. They're actually all internal. And so a female shark, most of them give birth to a live young, and sometimes they'll actually lay an egg. But the parturition part always happens with something coming out of the female when an animal is born. So what James has done is created this tag that will do that same thing. So if you take a female shark and you insert this, what we call this birth tag in, when she goes to give birth, that birth tag comes out at the same time. So therefore, we know when and where that birth is happening. And the cool thing about this is that we can put the birth tag in the animal without any surgery. It actually goes through, sharks have a cloaca similar to a bird. So one opening for reproduction and for waste disposal. And so we can go through the cloaca without having to do any type of surgery and insert one of these birth tags. So James does an ultrasound, says, hey, this animal is pregnant, puts a birth tag in it, we put one of our tracking tags on it, let it go, and then 6, 9, 12, 18 months later, that tag pops up, and we know that's exactly where the animal was when it gave birth. So super, super cool stuff that we're able to do now with the different technologies.
Is that also satellite?
So that is also satellite, yes. Yeah, so that one transmits directly to the satellite, but that one only says, hey, here I am. It doesn't do anything else besides that. It's just a simple pinger that tells you where it is. And so now we're going to find out, I've talked about some of the things that I know. We're going to find out what you all know about sharks. So we're going to play a game called Guess That Shark. So I'm going to show you one of the shark species that we have in Oregon, and you get to guess what it is. So these are your choices, and if you think you've got it, feel free to yell it out. We got a Pacific sleeper shark, a soup-fin shark, a broad-nosed sevengill, or a white shark. Y'all are really good. Usually people struggle with that one. That is a broad-nosed sevengill shark. Cool thing about a broad-nosed sevengill shark is, well, first it has 7 gills. There are about 1,250 species of sharks and rays and skates and chimeras, so the cartilaginous fish. So Teleost fish are bony fish, things like your tunas, your salmon, things like that, they all have bones. Sharks, rays, skates, and these bratfish called chimeras all have cartilage. They don't have any bones at all. And there's about, like I said, there's just over 1,200 species of these cartilaginous fish. There's only 9 of them out of all of those that have more than 5 gills. There's a few species of 6 gills, and a few species of 7 gills, and one species of 6-gill ray. So it's a very uncommon thing for there to be 7 gills in a shark. They have them. They're also sort of top of the food chain. So actually, if you looked at what they eat, they're actually above a white shark. So we think of white sharks as being like the apex predator or the apex shark species in the ocean. 7 gills are actually above them in what they eat. If they came head to head, a white shark would win, which we know happens. But when it comes to sort of like on paper, the 7 gills are actually higher on sort of what we call the trophic level than white sharks are. And so this is some work that's led by my student Jess Schulte. She's a PhD student, and she's been studying the movements and the behaviors and the diets and the distributions of these 7-gill sharks. And so this is a picture of her catching her first shark. I'm so glad I caught this because she was so happy. She had just driven all the way from Florida, like direct to the field site, got on a boat with her dad who drove out with her, and then promptly caught a shark. And so we bring the shark up in a specialized cradle onto the boat, we irrigate it, and while it's up, we do a bunch of measurements, we put tags inside it, on it, and as grad students get to do, they get to do the glorious job, she gets to shove her arm down the stomach of a 7-gill shark. So part of Jess's PhD is looking at their diet, and so she gets to puke them. So sometimes we will fill the stomach with water, and then sharks naturally evacuate their stomachs because they eat so many things that are indigestible, so they naturally sort of puke their stomachs out. So we invoke that a little bit if we fill it up with water. But in this instance, Jess is actually going in because there's some big chunks in there that she was trying to get out. And one story I love to tell is that at one point she was filling the shark's mouth or stomach with water, and you kind of feel the side until it gets some pressure. And the Ethan Persones, his head is there, we'll talk about him in a minute, he's decided, all right, feels like it's about ready. And so Jess will pull the water out, and then she'll put this big PVC pipe in to make it puke. Well, she was not fast enough with the transition, so she pulled her water pipe out, and then went to put the other one in, and the shark just did Saturday Night Live type of vomit, like the endless stream of vomit, all over, and I had never seen her so happy. So it was like, you've got a great field biologist with you, and that's their response. So, and it's not the most glorious job. These are just some examples of some things that Jess has pulled up. And so there's some fish parts in the top there, and a lot of what we're finding is actually marine mammals. So those are harbor seals in the bottom. And what's really interesting about these 7-gills is that the harbor seals that they're eating are bigger than some of the animals that we get the stomachs from. So we might have a shark that is somewhere between the 4 and 6 foot range, and they've been eating a harbor seal that's at least that big. So they actually have this really unique type of sort of fission-fusion hunting, where they don't hang out together in groups at all, but they all sort of recognize a good thing when they've got one. And so if somebody else is going after a harbor seal, another shark will come in, and they'll do this sort of choreographed on-the-spot behavior in order to take down bigger prey, which is a really, really cool and really, really unique thing in sort of all of the animal kingdom. One unique fact that we like to add in is that one time Jess actually found some beaver inside one of the 7-gills. Go beavs. So, any ideas what this shark is? Mako, white shark, leopard shark, or soup fin shark? Soup fin. Nailed it first try. This is a soup fin shark, also called a taupe shark, also called a school shark, a vitamin A shark. This is probably the most heavily exploited shark on our planet. Prior to our ability to synthesize vitamin A, sharks were their main source of vitamin A. And so, and especially during World War II, sharks were a massive source of vitamin A. And so soup fin sharks were a main source of that because they were somewhat abundant and easy to catch, and they had big livers for the size of the animal. A shark's liver can be about 30% of its body weight, just to get a sense, because that's where they they store all of their lipids. They don't have an air bladder like a teleost fish does, so like they can't regulate their place in the water column, but what they can do is eat, and all their lipids go into their liver, and that makes them more or less buoyant depending on how much they've eaten. So basically all the good stuff goes into their liver. This is why when killer whales kill a shark, they eat the livers, the same way that they eat the tongue out of gray whales and things like that. So it's the good bits. So the work that Ethan is doing is similar to Jess's work. So he's looking at the diet distribution of these animals. Here's us actually tagging our first student. This was the first shark to be electronically tagged off of Oregon ever, which is crazy to think about, that we've been doing this since the late 90s and other places, even since the 80s in Ireland with some of the basking sharks. And so this is the first one off of Oregon, and this was just a couple years ago. So Ethan is looking very similar to things that Jess is doing, looking at the feeding ecology and the movements of these animals. And they're super cool because they have this disparate behavior between males and females, where males are largely from San Francisco north and females are San Francisco south. So we're still trying to understand a little bit about how that works. Like, where do they mix, and how does the population know how to structure in that way? And why would you be a male and go north and a female and go south? And a cool fact about them is that we never knew, or up until recently, they'd never been found in the Puget Sound. And so this is the map just of the distribution. So as I said before, they have this sort of what we call sexual segregation, where you've got the blue is males, the red is females, and then the purple there is sort of the mixing. And what you'll notice is there's no color inside the Puget Sound there. But what happened is that we had gotten records, reports from someone on social media that they might have caught one in the Puget Sound. We said, okay, well maybe there's one, maybe up in Port Angeles or something. One kind of got into the Puget Sound. But what we found is that if we went all the way down, almost the deepest part of the Puget Sound, so this is down north of Shelton in Olympia, about as far as you can get in the Puget Sound, is where this person found a soup-fin shark. And we said, that's crazy. Is that like an animal that just sort of showed up randomly, something happened, it was sick, it washed up, somebody caught it, something like that. And so we actually went down to try to figure it out. And what we found is that there is basically an undescribed presence of Sevengill sharks, so Jess's species, which we have here, and then the soup-fin shark on the right. And so both Ethan and Jess published a paper about these new discoveries, basically, of these species in places that we had never known them to be. And this is really telling because these are places that we've historically had tons and tons of research efforts for what's in these systems, right? Because salmon have been really important, and gooey ducks and all those other things that are in these systems. But we know that there's six-gill sharks in dogfish, but never knew that these species were there. So we're trying to figure out, well, what's driving them there? Is it that we've missed them all this time? Is there something happening that might explain why these animals are now showing up there? And so I showed you before this picture of Jess puking a shark. You get this giant gallon bag full of harbor seal inside it. And it turns out that in the Puget Sound, in this region right down by Shelton, is that there's been, in the last 16 years, there's been a massive increase in the haul-outs of harbor seals. So it suggests the food resource that Sevengills really like has started to aggregate down there, and they might have started to key in on that. But that's not what the soup-fin eats. Soup-fin are eating things that are smaller, like sardines and anchovies. And so, well, what's driving that? Why do we think that's happening? And as we're all, unfortunately very well aware, is that our climate is changing, and our ocean is not an exception to that. In 2015 and 16, we had this huge thing called the blob, which we had this warm body of water that basically just sat off of our coast. And that caused this incredible warming in the Puget Sound. And this is the projection of what warming is going to happen in the future. The reason I'm showing this is because that warm environment became a new habitat that bait fish could move into. So things like anchovies could move. And actually we saw an increase in anchovies in 2015, 2016, and still till now, this increase in anchovies in with these warmer waters that have shown up. That is a favorite food of the soup-fin. So what we think happened was that the soup-fin moved in to exploit those anchovies. That may be the same thing that brought the more harbor seals in to exploit that same food source. So it actually might be climate that's driving the sort of the introduction of these different species into a place that they hadn't existed before. Anyone know what this one is? Salmon shark, leopard shark, white shark, or spiny dogfish? Spiny dogfish. This new projector makes it so much easier to see. You can see up on the top there the spine. This is a Pacific spiny dogfish, which is pretty evident from the spine on the back. That spine has venom in it, so if you get poked by it, it sort of starts to necrose that spine. And the cool thing about the spines is that we can age them the same way that you can age a tree from the growth rings. We can age a spiny dogfish from their spine. And this is some work that we're doing. This is a really prolific species, probably one of the most fecund species of sharks. They can have up to 100 or 125 pups in a litter. We call shark babies pups. They give live birth. And we actually catch them quite often, and you can see the females are super distended, and you can actually see the babies like wiggling around in their belly because they're so happy. It's kind of like that scene in Alien, you know, where like that thing pops out. It's kind of like that. But the thing about these dogfish is that they travel around in these schools of thousands of animals at a time. And so you might look down from an airplane and see a school of dogfish that is a couple kilometers long and a couple 100 meters wide of these dogfish that are this big, just swimming together. And so that makes them really susceptible to trawl fisheries. So when folks are coming through for things like whiting or hake, if you all have ever had surimi, imitation crab, that's made out of this fish we call whiting. And they have these massive nets that are usually really good at only targeting the whiting, but occasionally the fishermen get it wrong and they'll come up with a 20,000-ton net full of dogfish, which then get discarded. So the work that we're doing is trying to mismatch those things, to say, hey, this is where the dogfish are, this time of year, this is where they are in the water column, so this is where you shouldn't be fishing, you should be trying to target whiting in other places. So trying a little bit more about their habitat use. And this is some work that's led by Ethan Personius, a PhD student in the lab, and then Alexander McIntyre, who I talked about before as being the animal behaviorist in the lab. Okay, next species. White shark, salmon shark, super fin or common? This is a great one. This is a salmon shark. Salmon sharks are cousins of the white sharks. They're all in this family of lamnids. This is like the trickiest one of the day because they look so similar. What you'll notice about a salmon shark is that they're a little bit bluntier. They're sort of like like somebody took a white shark and kind of squished it together. So salmon sharks are endothermic. So like us, they keep an elevated body temperature. So most fish, they are the same temperature as the water around them. But there's a few species of sharks in the lamnid family. So that's the mackerel sharks. So they're white sharks, poor beagles, makos, basking, and thresher sharks. All have some ability to actually warm their body. And that allows them to be more dynamic in a cold water environment. You can imagine that if you see a snake out on a cold day, it's moving really slow, right? But if you have a rabbit out there that same day, because it's a warm body, it can move really fast. So by being a shark that's able to stay warm in a cold environment, it can be really dynamic. So salmon sharks live up in the Arctic, up in the Bering Sea, up to 3 degrees Celsius. And they're able to be really, really dynamic predators in that system because they can warm their brain and their eyes and their viscera for digestion. And so this is a species I've been working on for about 10 years. This is some work up in Alaska. You can see we put a series of those biologging tags and acoustic tags on the back of the shark, and then we release it, let it go up in the Prince William Sound. And so what we're really interested with them is sort of the role that they play, because they are this sort of prolific predator in the system, is what are they eating? Because as an endotherm, we have really fast metabolisms, right? It takes a lot of energy to stay warm. And salmon sharks are no different. And so we think that they're going to have a pretty big impact on the habitats in which they live. They also live in a pretty incredible place. So this is one of those camera tags on the back of a salmon shark swimming around Port Ravina in the Prince William Sound. So we also get to see what the animals do, but we can see a little bit about the beautiful places that they hang out as well. So from those tags, from those satellite tags, we're able to look at where these animals go. So these blue lines are tracked from the satellite tags. And the green are places where the animal do a behavior that we think is more related to foraging. So the blue lines are where the animal's sort of moving in straight lines, and then the green represents where they're really spinning around a lot. So we think that's indicative of them chasing prey. So you can see that they're doing most of their foraging up along the coasts, especially off of our coast here, out at Hector Bank, and then right along the coast of Oregon. So it's a really important place in Oregon for these animals. So we wanted to know, well, what are these animals eating? And so they're not as easy to catch as the Sevengill sharks are that Jess was working on, or the tope or the suit that Ethan was working on. So instead, we talked to the fisheries and have them bring us animals that they caught incidentally and that died on their boats. And so this is work that's led by Alice McInturf, and then two master students, Riley Boyd and Maddie English, and they're actually looking at what are in the stomachs of the salmon sharks. The fishermen actually bring the whole stomachs to us, and then we pop them open to look. And so that's a stomach on the left, and in the middle there are what we can pull out of it. And so most fish, or all fish I should say, have these ear bones called otoliths, and they're really hard to digest. And each species has a unique shape of otolith. So if we look at the kind of soup that's left in the shark's belly, the last things that are left are those otoliths or squid beaks, and we can identify the species and the number of animals that it's eaten by those squid beaks or those otoliths. So it gives us a good indication of what the animal has been eating. And so it turns out that what we found is that despite their name, salmon sharks aren't solely eating salmon. They're eating a lot of things like squid, the whiting or hake that I talked about a minute ago. They're actually called herring sharks in Russia, so we know they eat a lot of herring and other things. So it turns out we don't think they're as a voracious predator of salmon as we were sort of once expected. And one thing about them is that they often wash up on the beaches in the summer. So if any of y'all are ever down at the beach and find this sort of fun-sized white shark, it's actually a little baby salmon shark. And what we think happens is because they're endothermic, they maintain that temperature. When they're really small, they have a lot of surface area for volume. And so it's really hard for them to maintain their temperature. So if they get caught in some of this cold water, it actually drops their immune system, and then they get this encephalitis. No, it's not encephalitis. It's meningitis. Sorry, I say that all the time. It's a meningitis that actually basically affects their brain, and they wash up on beaches because they can't function anymore. So it's this sort of like double whammy of cold water drops their immune system, and then this bacterial infection. So if you do find these are things that are great for us because we actually will use these animals to understand more about what killed them, and then we can sample them for a bunch of different things like stomach contents and whatnot. That's an easy one. Thresher shark. Yeah, this is probably the most identifiable shark because of that tail, which can be sometimes the full length of the body is that tail. And thresher sharks are in that family with the white sharks. They're also warm-bodied. And I usually put these up here. We've been trying to study them. They're incredibly hard to find. But I think the coolest part about them is that they don't come through and whip their tail side to side. So a swordfish will come through a school of fish and swiggle its head a little bit, whack some fish, and then come back and eat it. A thresher shark actually does a full front flip. So I would highly recommend when y'all are out of here, go to YouTube and just look flipping thresher shark. And you'll see a thresher shark swim through a bait of prey and just do this full front flip. So sort of like an Indiana Jones bullwhip. It'll flip over, strike the fish, and then come back around and eat them. So it's really, really crazy and a really cool adaptation. It does a full headstand whenever it feeds. So a really cool sort of behavior. And then this one. Great, yeah. So this is the white shark. And so before I said, that sometimes the salmon shark was hard to identify. These are three species that are often mistaken for white sharks. Then we know what these three are. I'll cheat, y'all already saw that one. That's the salmon shark there. We know what that one is? That's a basking shark. So it's in the same family. Those are the ones that get up to about 30 feet, but they are filter feeders, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the one on the far right there is a mako shark. So those are three species that are often confused for white sharks. I get lots of reports about white sharks in places in sizes that they can't really be. And that's mostly because it's folks finding these other species. And so this is work I've been doing for 20 years now. I started my PhD work doing white shark movements and behaviors in California and continue that work now. And so this is that shark I talked about, Rona. So this is actually the drone shot from that photo I showed before. You see she comes up the boat, does a little spy hop, Video cuts out, and then she comes back around, and you'll see me put a tag in her back. It just gives you a sense of the size of her. So she's about an 18-foot female, and there's about 2 minutes or 3 minutes of video before this where she just cruises around the boat. And the reason she's coming up to the boat is that we have a piece of bait in the water, and we have a decoy in the water, and we're in a place that we know sharks go to hunt. And so their normal behavior is basically just to come check things out and look at it. So you notice she wasn't trying to jump on the boat, she wasn't biting things, she wasn't doing all those things you sort of see on TV. And that's more representative of the behavior. She spy hopped up to look at me. She looked me square in the eye when she came up, and then just kept swimming around, which is pretty normal behavior. But at that point, I put one of those satellite tags on. And so this is what we saw from those data, is that these animals are along our coasts for part of the year, and then the other half of the year, they're actually going to the middle of the Pacific. This is a spot we've called the White Shark Cafe. Mostly that's because we don't necessarily know why they're going. We thought it was an oceanographic dead spot, sort of like a desert. And so it was like, you're in the California current, you got tons of things to eat, and you're going out to the middle of the desert. Why are you doing that? We sort of equated it to being like, you're in Vegas, in an all-you-can-eat buffet, and you're like, I'm going to go hang out in the desert. And you're like, well, there's got to be something else that's in the desert. So we decided that either there was a mating opportunity that they had out in the cafe, or that there's a better food source out there. So that's why we call it the cafe, because you can kind of go meet somebody special or grab a bite to eat. So we're still working on what that is. There's this whole hypothesis called the pancake hypothesis. If I have time later and anybody wants to know, it's my favorite thing to talk about. My students cringe every time I say that, because they've heard it so many times. But I'm happy to talk about it. But that's what these tags can do, is that they show us these large movements. So if we had acoustic tags on these animals, we'd have no idea that the sharks were out there. Remember, we have to have those receivers out there. But because we put a satellite tag on it, that's not exact. It wasn't exactly right there. It might have been 100 miles off from there. But in the grand scheme, that doesn't really matter, right? So when you're talking on this type of scale. And I think the last species that I'll talk about are one of those white shark lookalikes, and that's the basking shark. And this is one of the coolest sharks, I think, that's out there. They're the goofiest looking shark. They're also super, super cool. So just to show you goofy, that's a basking shark breaching. It is not majestic in any way. It's like somebody shot a loose noodle out of the water. Basking sharks are super cool because they are these massive filter feeders, right? So you've got blue whales, which are the largest animal on the planet, eating the tiniest things. And the largest sharks in the ocean are eating the tiniest things as well. So this shark, again, can be up to 30, 35 feet long, something like that. And it is just a grazer. And so it opens its mouth, and it's a ram feeder. And so that means it has to constantly swim to pull water. So a blue whale can basically engulf, right? It can open its mouth and suck all that water in. A whale shark can do the same thing, it can suck water in. A basking shark has to continue moving. So it's pretty crazy, right? You think about, you're swimming forward, and then you open this giant parachute, which is your mouth, that's going to filter all this krill through. So there's all these crazy sort of dynamics that happen, and energetic costs, and things that the animal has to do in order to offset that. Also, marine mammals, so your whales and your basking sharks, are very, very different evolutionarily. But they have these really cool convergent structures. So that's another part we're looking at. Like, how did they develop these similar structures in order to feed on a similar resource, but in a very different way? And just to give some cool, how mysterious these things are, they come in and they hang out in these massive groups. And so, again, remember, these are like 30 feet long. And so you just have these groups of animals from the surface to 40 meters down, swimming together. Just these giant, wide open mouths. Just really, really incredible. And this is work we're doing in Ireland. This is a species we have here, but they're really hard to find because we've killed them off. That's a whole other thing I'll tell you about. Actually, they would get caught up in salmon fishing nets in the 70s, and actually the Canadian government put a giant razor blade on the front of a boat. And because the basking sharks would be up, they're baskers, right? They're at the surface, sort of like in the sunlight, eating the plankton. The boat would just drive over and kill the sharks. And that was part of their culling effort. And one day, I think their record was 34 sharks killed in a day. Pretty incredible what we've done, but there are places where they're starting to come back, and this is Ireland. And this is one of my favorite projects because they do such interesting things and it's such a big scale. So this is work that's led by Alexander McIntyre. Again, she's our animal behavior. She actually came out of the same program at UC Davis that Jamie did. So they were in the same, Jamie did the bird behavior and Alex is doing the shark behavior. So we're all sort of mixed together in our histories. But so she's working with these things called chat tags, and they're like a proximity logger or a communication tag. And so the tags have, remember I talked about an acoustic tag and an acoustic receiver? Well, they have both of those put together so that she can basically create shark social media. So you put these on the animals, and when two animals come near each other, they transmit back and forth who they are and who they're next to. So the same way that you can do one of those sort of like social media figures, we can do that with the sharks and figure out who's traveling with whom. And the big question about that is like, well, why? Are these animals just sort of a fission fusion? You all came here tonight, and tomorrow if I came here, there might be a totally different group of people here, right? But if I came in next month, the same day, a lot of you would be here again. And what is drawing you all together? So is that the science? Is that the beer? Is that the Stromboli? You never know. So that's part of what we're trying to understand. What Alex is working on is trying to understand what's driving these, and if there's some relationship. Is it all males that are together? Are there familial groups that are doing these things together? And this just gives you a sense of Alex tagging. So this is what we call a shark train, a bunch of animals sort of up at the surface feeding. And Alex comes in with one of those tagging poles, puts the tag in. That animal usually drops down and then it comes back up and just continues to feed. So obviously we don't want to impact its behavior, so we want to make sure that it's going back to what it's meant to be doing. And this is just a video of one of those tags trailing behind a shark. So that shark is now communicating with the other tagged sharks around it, saying, "Hey, here I am, and record me on your receiver." So we can start to draw some of those behaviors together about whether animals stay together in these groups for long periods, or they break up, or when they travel to the Mediterranean or up to the Arctic, are they going in these same groups, or do they sort of just scatter like marbles? So that's a little bit about the work that we do. Just a handful of the species that we have here. Again, there's 16. I need to add prickly shark on at the bottom of this. But there's so much to learn, so much that we're figuring out, but still so much that we haven't figured out. And so, if you're interested in the work that we do, there's lots of different ways to get involved or to learn more. I talked about salmon sharks washing up. If anybody finds them on the beach, these are an awesome thing. We have a number on our websites and a reporting page on our websites. I've gotten so many in the last few weeks that people have seen salmon sharks and white sharks and all sorts of things. It's wonderful because it helps us draw that picture of information that we didn't have about their distributions here. Whether you're at sea or at a beach and see it, or if you're fishing and you catch one of these animals that has a tag in it, has a phone number on it, those are things that we do to identify individuals. So this is great for us to pull information from people's experience. Obviously, the more eyes on the water and the more eyes on the coast, the better for us. We also do tons of fun events. Just last week, we did one at Prax, which is our new performing arts center on campus. We had about 650 people. We did a live dissection with a live jazz band, which was the second annual Big Fish Fest. So things like that, which is a big sort of outdoor vibe that we do with folks. Obviously, we do talks like this. You might see us on KPFA or the other radio station, TV station. Anyway, you'll see us in the news and things like that. We also have events coming up. If anybody is so interested, we have a Sharktoberfest event, which is being hosted at OMSI. This is our second annual, and so it's October 11th from 7 to 10. It's an adults-only 21-plus evening. And we have shark print artists. We have a bunch of different beer vendors. We have a ton of different activities and things like that. So a fun thing for a cold Saturday evening, if anybody's interested. One of the other things, which I actually brought with me, and this is why I was talking about that photo in the beginning, this is our shark license plate. So y'all haven't seen it out yet because we are still selling vouchers. But I do have one with me here tonight. So that is what your car could look like. So we tell you you're going to need a bigger car. So this was designed by my student Natalie Donato, again the one actually there's Natalie right there. So she's an undergrad and an artist. She's actually redoing the whole poster for Sharks of Oregon with all 16 species. But this is a license plate that it's one of the, you've probably seen the gray whale one or the bee one. This is similar. It costs $40 every 2 years. And so at this point we're trying to get over that 3,000 hurdle. We're at about 1,200 right now. So if you want a super cool license plate, it's a great time to do it. You can go to our website and do it, or I can talk to you. I actually have cards here with the website on it. If you already have an amazing license plate and you don't want this license plate, but you want to help us get to the 3,000, you can buy a voucher for $40, and then you don't have to do anything with it. You can consider that a donation to the lab. So if you're interested, if you want to see the license plate more, it's up here. It's got the salmon shark, which we talked about, some blue sharks, and then the thresher shark. And that's our vibrant ocean plate. So with that, it is 8 o'clock on the dot. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm happy to take questions, and I will say, or if you want any of the cool Big Fish Lab gear, we also have that. If you see my kids running around, they're my marketing scheme, so they have some of them as well. So, yes?
I am fascinated by the practical process. And I would like to know, one, how much they cost.
Yep.
Are they made in this country or are they made all over? Are they used in all the other countries?
That was more than one thing. Yeah, so there are a few different, for the satellite tags, the leading company is here. It's in Redmond, Washington. It's called Wildlife Computers, and they are made here, and they cost about $3,700 a tag, and they are a one-time use. If they go on and they'll collect information for up to a year, sometimes up to 2, depends on how you program them, and then they pop off. When they pop off, they send sort of a summary of information to us, because it takes so much energy to transmit to satellites. And so it transmits a summary. If we can get them back, then we get the full archive. So every 30 seconds, the depth and the temperature and the light levels, which helps us with location. So we can get the full data set back if we get them back. But otherwise, they transmit a subset to the satellites for us. And I will say that we've actually been working, one of the projects I work on in Germany with the Max Planck is that we put a satellite system, or an animal-specific satellite on the International Space Station to do something smaller in lower energy and things like that. But when all this stuff happened with Russia, basically they got shut down. So we're putting another animal-specific satellite system up to try to do smaller, sort of low-cost versions of this as well. That was a longer answer than you wanted, but there you go. Yeah.
What are some of the unusual things found in the stomach of sharks?
So, what are some of the unusual things? I did a lot of work before I came to California for grad school in Florida, and it was the shark fisheries there, and so I remember cutting open a tiger shark. I don't know if you remember that scene in Jaws where they think it's the shark that ate the people, and it's a tiger shark. And they cut it open, and the license plate falls out. And so this was, there's stories of a suit of armor, all sorts of things coming out of shark stomachs. But I did not find that. What I found instead were pig's feet. And it baffled me forever. I could not figure out I was like, this is the weirdest thing, I have no idea. Then I found out that the lobster fishermen there use pig's feet as bait. That made a whole lot more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned migration, and it reminds me of the European sparrow that migrates. and they have a sensor in their nose or in the eye. I don't remember which one, but they use the magnetic field wave for migration.
Yeah.
So where is the sensor in shark and what does it use?
Yeah, so that is a wonderful question, and that is that's a whole huge field, because there's and I didn't get to this part of my postdoc when we were looking at the magnetic navigation, so thank you for setting me up. So yeah, there's a couple different ways, and we're not sure for many species how they do it, whether they have an actual magnetic organ or they have these isotopes in their eyes that get excited by photons coming through. There's all these different debates, but we do know that sharks have this sort of sixth sense, which we call its magnetic sense. And they have these organs called ampullae of Lorenzini. And so they're if you, I don't have any close-up shots of any of the sharks, but you'll see on their nose they have these little pores, and these little gel-filled pores go to the ampullae, and the ampullae can actually, the gel conducts electricity, and then the ampullae transmits that to the head. So that's how they detect basically electric fields. And so we know that they pick up the transfer of ions across the gills of their prey and the firing of the muscles. So not the heartbeat, which is what we thought. We sort of went with that, like, that's what they sense. It's not. It's the ion transfer across the gills. But they pick it up through those ampullae of Lorenzini. So we know that they can orient to magnetic fields, but there's this confounding thing in water, in salt water specifically, is that if an animal is swimming through a magnetic field, it induces an electric field. So we don't know whether they're picking up the magnetic field of the Earth, or it's the electric field that it creates by them swimming through it that they're detecting. So we're not sure whether they have a magnetic sense as well, or they're all using their electric sense to pick up the induced electric field. But they can use that, like hammerheads can use that to navigate the difference in the fields of different areas. So yeah, we think that they do something similar to birds, because they'll travel thousands of miles and come back. I have animals that were tagged, and 365 days later, popped off 100 meters away, and during that time we went from California to Hawaii and back. Yeah, pretty incredible. Yeah.
Is it true that sharks don't develop cancers?
That is not true. Yeah. So there was this idea that sharks didn't get cancer, and so there started to be all sorts of treatments where you would take shark cartilage pills and things like that. It turns out that we just didn't look enough. It was one of those things, because you think about it, like, you find a cancerous growth on something, it usually inhibits that animal or kills that animal in some way. And so if you're in the ocean, if that animal is inhibited, or it's going to be eaten by something else, so we're very unlikely to come across them. Also, it has to be somebody that recognizes that it's cancer and then brings that in and says, hey, is this cancer? So later on, we have figured out that they do get cancer. Yeah, you want to follow up?
How many chromosomes do sharks have, and do they have the same number?
As us, or?
As sharks.
I do not know. I don't know why I asked that question, because I don't know whether I don't know how many. I can find that out for you though.
What's in it for a shark to be cartilaginous? Or on the other hand, are there disadvantages to being cartilaginous?
Yeah. So there are a few. One is that they are very basically bendy, and so they can. It helps their locomotion. So if you've ever looked at the way a shark swims, that they don't use any of their external or pectoral fins to move, as you might see, like clownfish is going to use those, but they're using the whole undulation of their body to move it, so it allows them to, it basically allows them more mobility. It also is less energetically costly to produce than it is, than bone is. And there's a couple other things with structure that go along with that. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your pancake hypothesis?
Okay. Who's ready for it? Okay. Okay. So we'll set this up. So sharks go out to so males and females go out to the cafe. And as they're traveling out to the cafe, they do this thing we call diel vertical migration, which basically means as they travel, during the daytime, they're going to go down deep, and during the nighttime, they come up. And the reason that is because when you're in the open ocean, there's nowhere to hide, right? There's no place to refuge. And so the surface is where all the phytoplankton are, right? The plants in the ocean. And if you're a zooplankton, so the animal plankton that wants to eat them, if you hang out at the surface, you're very visible during the day, right? So those zooplankton actually go down deep during the day, and they hide out in the darkness. And then at night, when it's dark at the surface, they come up and eat the phytoplankton. And so, as we know, sort of like as strategies go, the zooplankton do that. Then the things that eat them figured out. Well, the zooplankton go up at night. I'm going to go up at night, and I'm going to follow them down during the day. And so we see basically the whole marine assemblage goes up and down. So up during the night and down during the day. So sharks follow that the whole time out to the cafe, and so it suggests that they're feeding on something, they're eating something. When they get to the cafe, the females continue to do that, and the males do this crazy rapid oscillatory dive, which means that they are actively swimming up and down in the water column about 150 times a day. So 300 meters down, 300 meters up, 300 meters down, all day long, just up and down behavior. So the females are still doing the same thing, like this, and the males are going up and down. We're trying to figure out, well, why is that? Is there a food resource that they're trying to exploit by doing this oscillatory diving? And we said, well, males and females would probably both be doing it if it was a common resource. So we said, well, what else could it be? This is where the pancake hypothesis comes in. So if you think about the ocean, it's not uniform. So it's set up sort of like, it's layered, depending on whether that's temperature or whether that's salt or whatever it is, it's layered, right? So so it's sort of like a stack of pancakes, if you will, right? Each of these different layers of water is a pancake. And we know that some species, or we think that some species of sharks, when a female is sexually receptive, she'll release a pheromone that says she's sexually receptive or sexually ripe. And so she's going to release that into the water. And if you imagine that we have these pancake layers, if she releases a pheromone in this layer, it's not going to mix throughout the water column. It's going to mix along that horizontal plane, just in that pancake of water. And so, if I was a male, and I wanted to interact and find a female, I'm not going to swim horizontally like this. I'm going to cut through as many times as I can. So you imagine you have your pile of pancakes, and somewhere in that pile I put some syrup. And tomorrow morning you go to breakfast, and I put syrup on one of those pancakes, not all of them. And I said, I want you to guarantee that when you take a bite, you're going to get syrup in it. How are you going to do it? You're not going to take the top. You're not going to take the top one off, right? You're going to cut all the way down through it. And that's the way that we think the males find the receptive females, is by diving up and down in that water column as many times as they can, as fast as they can, to come into contact with that pheromone. And that's the pancake hypothesis. Thank you for asking. And you can think about it as a male that is fitter and a male that's bigger and can do it more is going to more likely find a female, right? So it has that sort of sexual selection to it. Yep.
That mid-Pacific accumulation point,
Yep.
is there any connection between that and the Pacific gyre with the human trash?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the Pacific gyre is actually much further north, actually north of Hawaii. And so they're let's see if I can look back to it. So they're two sort of different regions. It's funny because I get that question quite often. And it's, though the location of those are different, the dynamics are kind of similar in what happens. So you can imagine, can you see my cursor? Yeah, so up here is where that gyre happens. Because there's a big Pacific gyre that happens here. But what's cool about the cafe here is what we think is happening is that you have this big circulation system that goes up through Alaska and down our coast and then hits the equator. You imagine it would kind of, you can't see my cursor there, it would kind of pop off here. And what we actually see is that when the current comes down across the equator, we call equatorial current. It's a hard one. It comes here. It actually kicks off all of these little eddies and the little gyres. And every year, for some reason, the physics of it work that those gyres sort of end up there, right in that White Shark Cafe. And you can imagine that's like, it's like a little tornado. So it can, whether it's food or whether it's oxygen or whatever it is, but it can sort of concentrate those resources there. And so we think that that might be part of what's leading it there, because normally in the ocean you see your production at the surface where the sun can hit it, right? Because its primary production is plants. But what we see at the cafe is that production is actually like 30 meters down, which is really neat. So we don't ever see it from the satellites, because when we look at ocean productivity, we see like the top couple inches of the water from the satellite. But when that productivity is 30 meters down, we never see it. That's why we thought it was this dead zone. But it might be these sort of underlying physics of the massive currents that are creating something subsurface. That is why the sharks are there. And we actually went out with the Smith Ocean Institute, so it's the Google sort of research arm, in 2018, and spent a month out there sort of looking at what the assemblage was. And it's an incredible place, but we are still sort of scratching our heads to really nail down what's happening there.
Because of the feeding behavior of the basket shark, I can imagine that they're very susceptible to ingesting a lot of plastic. Have you done any research regarding that?
So the work that we do with the salmon sharks, we've been actually, and my student Maddie just presented last week on this, is that they are, because they're endothermic, they're high metabolism. They actually have a much higher rates of plastic ingestion than most other species of sharks that have been studied. Basking sharks are on our list of animals because you're right. So they actually have this mucus along their gill rakers, so sort of the slits. And when they open their mouth, the plankton gets caught in those. They kind of sneeze a little bit to get the mucus off, and then they eat that. And so we think there's probably a high level of plastics in them. I think the big question is for us is about how fast do those plastics get past? Because they are processing that mucus, and they're sort of pushing that all through. And so I guess we expect that there is a high volume of micro and macroplastics in them, but we don't know if they can push those through more quickly or not. So we occasionally get stranded animals, and that's one of our next questions with a stranded animal that we get. Yes.
So there was some information out relatively recently about how great whites are moving farther north in the Atlantic on the east coast, up into even Maine and Canada.
Yep.
And the speculation was it was with warming oceans and warming temperatures. But if they're endotherms, why would that matter that much?
It's a great question. So we've seen the same thing here. We've actually seen, so traditionally, white sharks would give birth down in Southern California bites, so sort of the LA, Santa Barbara area in that warm water. And we'd never seen, one time we'd seen a newborn up in the Monterey Bay area. And then when that warm water blob hit, the water's all warmed. Monterey and Santa Cruz got really warm, and since that time, 2015, 2016, we've seen a pretty static nursery area for white sharks in Monterey Bay. So we have seen this northern shift, and we think that has to do with temperature. And the reason that they would expand is because even if they are endothermic, it costs energy, right, to maintain. So you think about if you go outside right now, you'll do all right, right? You'll be fine. It's going to take some energy to stay warm. If you went out in January outside, you're still endothermic, but it's going to take you a lot of energy to stay warm, right? You're going to start shivering and all those things to keep your body warm. So it does. So even though they are endothermic and can maintain an elevated temperature, it still has a cost associated with it. And so if their ideal sort of temperature, what we call a thermal envelope, is expanding, then they can expand with that. So basically the habitat they want to be in expands, then they're going to follow that. Anything else?
What percentage of their body is cartilage approximately?
What percentage of their body is cartilage? I would guess it is probably, think about it, it's probably in the 7 to 10% range would be my guess.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
About 30 years ago, we were filming in the Farallones water, and Channel Islands, egg sacs and livers on sharks in the Channel Islands. But we were working with whites in the Farallones, because that's where we found them. But we were having to bait them in, and so we were trying to put decoys down with different colors, and they'd come and bump things. But the only thing they were aggressive about was yellow decoys.
Yum, yum, yum.
Yeah, is that
Yeah, so actually there's a lot of sort of debate in the popular media about colors and sharks, white sharks historically were thought to be, like everything else, sort of this mindless predator, but then we figured out they have similar rods and cones and vision that we have. But I don't know that there's been any statistically sort of robust look at the color regimes of things. There's some ideas that contrasting colors will make a difference. Obviously, yum yum yellow, I said it a minute ago. It's like it's something people talk about. I actually knew somebody who bought their Exo surfboard with an elephant seal silhouette on the bottom. But I don't know that any of those actually make much difference. I think we've worked with different shapes, and we try to do, because there's been some sea otter mortalities from white sharks. We've been trying to look at if the different size classes of sharks prefer different shapes and things like that. But it's been really hard because there's so many things that go into a choice that it's hard as you know, at the Farallones. So that's where I've been working since 2005. It's so hard to create a controlled experiment where you can get rid of all of those other variables and say it is the yellow decoy or the red decoy or whatever, because it might be that today there's a little bit of cloud cover and that's the thing, or somebody left the key on in the boat and it's sending an electric pulse in the water and that's it. So it's like I guess that was a very long way to say that I don't know that we know, but we do know they have a really keen sense or a keen eyesight.
What about, we found aggressive shark behavior in Micronesia, and John McCluster, I think in San Francisco, talking shark, he said a lot of underwater cameras, the 102 strobe in particular, was giving a tone off. And we found oceanic whitetip. If you were using a 102, that shape they do just before they attack you, if you turned it off, they'd shake themselves and then go away. So you'd think once they set themselves up for an attack with the body posture, it was going to happen, but it was just that tone.
Yeah, no, and sharks typically key into those really low frequency tones is what they go to. And actually, oceanic whitetips are a great example, because there's a story of a helicopter that came to help a guy whose boat had sunk, and as they brought the helicopter in, he actually got killed by an oceanic whitetip. And they were that sort of precipitated this whole study into why did that lead the helicopter coming in contribute to that mortality? And what they found out is that they are actually attracted to that low frequency thump of the helicopters, not because they there's somebody in the water because there's a helicopter, but that's sort of attractive. But what I will say is that, so from putting these camera tags on white sharks, one of the things we're really interested in is sort of the energetics of the breach of the shark coming out of the water, because that's really, really costly. And so we would put the cameras on them, and there's a number of times where the shark would go through the whole process of explosion, from going from 2 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour in sort of the snap of a finger, and it has got to the surface that you'd see this perfectly silhouetted bait, and then the shark would bail. And when you watched it in real time, you're like, why did it not go for that seal? That's a perfect opportunity. If you watched it in slow motion, you saw that was actually a cormorant. And the shark in that moment, even though it had already exerted all of that energy and totally could have eaten that cormorant, turned. So it knew enough. So it's kind of like that idea of turning the strobe off. It's like they really know what they want, and they're in it, and when it's not the right thing, they can sort of just turn off and they go on. That's why there's so many of us in the water. We are super ungainly in the water. I don't care how good we think we are at swimming or surfing or any of those things. We're goofy. And if they wanted to eat us, they would. I had one of my colleagues yesterday call me because he had a shark swim under his board in Newport yesterday. If they wanted to eat people, there'd be a lot less surfers in the water because they are that discerning and can sort of turn it off sort of on a dime.
Is there any truth to the notion that they're very sensitive to blood and they can sense it far off and they go for it?
So that's a great question too. So it turns out that sharks they aren't any more or less sensitive than any other fish species. So they don't actually have a super sense in terms of their noses. What they do is they have a unique channeling system depending on the species of how the water channels it. So if you've ever looked at a dog's nose, so when a dog breathes out in its mouth, it actually pushes the air up into its nose, and sort of the way that the physics works, it continues even if the dog stops, is breathing in and out, it's constantly flushing air into its nose. So sharks can do something sort of similar, where they have a system that directs basically the water and the scent through. So their ability to perceive it isn't any better, but their channels are different depending on the species. And then the other thing about the sort of the concentration of blood is that they're smelling in the parts per million. There's this adage that they can smell a drop of blood in an Olympic-sized pool, which is that's a little bit far-fetched for what they can actually do. And the other part of it is that for us, like they're not interested in mammal blood, like they're not interested in people blood, right? So it's not that signature that they're looking for. They're really good. Remember, they've been doing this for 400 million years, and so they know what they're looking for. And it turns out that it's that sense is not us. And the people that you drop a thing of water, of blood in the water, and you're like, oh my God, there's gonna be sharks everywhere. You also have to remember that blood also has to get out, right? It has to diffuse out to where the animals actually are in order to attract them, even if they were going to be attracted. So there's so many things that go into that. I think that's one of those narratives that really has gotten pushed as being some like super sense, and basically as soon as you put blood in the water, it's going to be a feeding frenzy.
One more question, you have time for?
Yes.
What is being done on an international level to protect sharks, since so many are being killed on an annual basis?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There's a lot that's being done. The problem is there's a lot of initiatives, and so like the United States, we passed in the I can't remember, it was the Infrastructure Act that Biden put through, I think it was, but they basically banned shark fin in the United States, right? So we are no longer a producer, we are no longer a buyer, and we are no longer a conduit for that. There's been a lot of international effort to sort of curb the shark fin soup market. So shark fin there's this little cartilaginous noodle that has no caloric value, it has no flavor, it's basically a status symbol. And so you put it into this broth and you make that. And so there's been a big sort of pushback to say that it's no longer a status symbol, it means something different now. And so people have been sort of stepping away from that. The problem with shark fins is that there's an incredible illegal market for it, and there's not a ton of policing that happens on the high seas. And so if say, China comes over and or Japan comes over and fishes a bunch of sharks here, and it's totally illegal, it's up to China or Japan, wherever that ship comes from, for them to enforce the rules. And so that's the way that the law of seas works. So even if they come here and do something that we know is illegal, or we see it, or we catch them, we actually can't enforce it. It's their country that has to do it. And so it's sort of the ball's being dropped largely. And also, it's really hard to police these offshore waters, because most of these catches happen, like the pelagic animals, the offshore animals, is happening without eyes on the water. Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard.
What is your status of the source of funding for your research?
The status and the source of funding is it sucks. To be brutally honest, we had our two biggest grants got pulled back. The one that does the dogfish work, we're trying to keep the hake fishery, the largest volume fishery in Oregon. We're trying to keep it open because we think that we can mismatch the fishers with the sharks. We think we can separate them. And we got that money pulled. That was an Oregon Sea grant. And then we had our main NOAA grants. We had with the Navy to do so much more of our work. That all got pulled as well. So it's been really, really hard. We're sort of, I'm taking less students now than I normally would, so that's impacting my, sort of the education part of what we do, and we're very limited in a lot of our abilities to do the work. Because your question about the tags, it's not cheap. That tag is $3,700. The camera tags that we put out, they're reusable, but they're about $15,000 a piece. Plus you have to pay for book time to get them. So it's really difficult. But that's why we're like the license plate is something that we're doing as an alternative to say, all right, we need to find a different way. So I should say that with this, I don't know how the DMV does it, but it's the only place in the country I know that does it. $40 for the plate, 30 of that comes to the research, goes straight to us, right? So it's not some like 1 or 2%, it's a lot. So we're having to sort of rethink, go to private foundations, but when you go to private foundations, you're at the whim of the person with the money. So I've had some projects in the Indian Ocean, this 10-year project in this archipelago sort of in the middle of nowhere. It was funded by a billionaire, and one year he decided, he's like, nah, I'm over it. We had just invested multiple millions of dollars of equipment, and it's all just washed away. So, sorry to be a buzzkill at the end of this. It's hard. I'm going to take it up at the end and say that some species of sharks, we actually are doing the right thing. There's protected areas that are going into place. We are seeing an increase in some populations. So the more that we sort of invest personally and emotionally in sort of what these animals bring to our systems, we actually can turn it around. So the doom and gloom of the shark fin trade and things like that does not have to be the direction that we go, because we're showing signs that we actually can be resilient, and these populations can be resilient. We can make the right decisions when the time is necessary. So with that, thank you all so much. If anybody sees my kids,